Okay, we finished the epithelial tissues. Now we're going to talk about connective tissues. And connective tissues, there's 12 types of those. We have two groups, 5 major categories. The groups I'm not going to worry about nearly as much. That's not a big deal to me, and I don't think it's all that particularly useful, really. The 5 major categories are loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, cartilage, bone, and blood. Now the book and certain other places also group these guys into 2 groups, proper and specialized or special. And I'll point these out when we get in the next slide. I'll talk about a couple differences where you see these. The problem is that different people categorize these things a little bit differently. So if you learn it one way, someone else is going to say it's a different way. So it's kind of those 2 categories aren't nearly as useful, I don't think, either. So, but anyway, just I'm going to read these words to you just so you know what they sound like. So, loose connective tissue is composed of areolar, reticular, and adipose. Dense connective tissue, you have dense regular and dense irregular and elastic connective tissue. Then you have cartilage. You have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. And elastic cartilage and elastic connective tissue are different. Okay, so this is elastic connective tissue and this is elastic cartilage, and they are different, and we'll talk about why or how they are different later on. Then you also have bone. You have compact bone and spongy bone. Then you have blood, and blood is composed of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. So the book also divides these into proper and specialized, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so that's the 12 different types in the 5 major categories: loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, cartilage, bone, and blood. So 5. Next slide. So in the book, the other problem the book does is they also take some tissues and put them into in their own category. So I'm going to stick with the 5 categories. This loose connective tissue containing areolar, reticular, and adipose. Dense connective tissue containing dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Then cartilage or cartilaginous tissue containing hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. And then bone containing compact and spongy bone, and blood. And blood is composed of various cells. So let's see. The lab book puts reticular and adipose, takes them out of loose connective tissue and puts them into their own categories. So, which I think is rather a little different. You can make an argument, and the problem is in anatomy you can make an argument for lots of different things. But in the end, what you want to do is have a system for learning the stuff so that it pretty much fits in those categories, and so that you can learn it. And because the categories don't really matter all that much, what it matters is that you learn what these things do and why they are different from each other. So there's 12 different types of connective tissue, and I like to put them in these five categories. Proper and specialized or special are not that useful category. And you also see the book versus there's Wikipedia, and they put them under special, category special. So the book puts reticular and adipose into a different category under proper. So it's just this kind of mess. So anyway, just to kind of give you an overview of depending on which reference you look at, it may have different categories. So don't get freaked out if you see different tissues and put in different categories. Just remember there's these 5 categories. The easiest way to remember: loose connective, dense connective, and then cartilage, bone, and blood. So next slide. So connective tissue. What is connective tissue? Well, remember we went back to the first slide. We talked about epithelial tissues cover. So connective tissues connect. It's the most abundant primary tissue in the body. Primary meaning epithelial or connective or muscle or nervous. Okay, so it's the most abundant primary tissue in the body. It contains cells, ground substance, fibers, also known as cells, gels, and fibers. So you have cells, and you have fibers. And we have fibers. I'll draw these as like little cylinders, okay? And you can have fibers that are small and they're all over the place. And you can have longer fibers maybe. Okay? So you have cells. So this is a cell right here. Here's a nucleus for it. So you have cells and fibers, and then all around it. Let's go to a different color just for fun. Let's do blue. Then you have gel all around this. So you have cells, gel, or which is actually called ground substance. Okay, so there you go. You have cells, ground substance, and fibers. So what does it do? Well, it connects things. It connects epithelial tissues to other tissues. It forms an internal framework for soft organs. So you can have we'll talk about that in a second. But it can give you a framework so that an organ has a shape to it. You can form tendons, which connect muscle to bone. You can form ligaments, which connect bone to bone. The bone is a type of connective tissue. It protects body organs, provides a framework for muscle movement because muscles can't do anything unless they pull against a bone. So they pull against a bone, and that moves that limb. So this is moving my arm. So I contract the bicep, and there's a tendon here at the end of the bicep. You can feel it if you partially contract your arm, and you can feel a tendon right there, the biceps tendon, and it goes across the elbow to the forearm down here. And so then this biceps contract, and it pulls my arm towards my shoulder. Adipose tissue. It insulates. It also stores lipids. It also provides a little bit of cushioning as well. And then blood, that provides a liquid medium for transport of substances throughout the body. There's low cellularity. Now you remember on the previous slide I said, notice how there's only a couple cells in that connective tissue, but there's a lot of space around, a lot of stuff around those two cells. When I was circling those, that means there's lots of space between cells. There's lots of room, I should say, between cells. It's filled with something called extracellular matrix. Okay, the function of the connective tissue is determined by the properties of the extracellular matrix, and it's also often abbreviated ECM. That ECM is produced by the connective tissue cell. Whatever type of cell is there produces different types of extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is a combination of fibers and ground substance. It has fibers and it has ground substance. Fibers, major types are collagen, that gives you strength, elastin, strength and elasticity, reticular fibers, which are fine branching fibers. So those are the major types of fibers, collagen, elastin, and reticular fibers. Ground substance is a fluid or semi-fluid, viscous, or gelatinous substance, or it's hard. Okay, so you can't see it behind my head, so it's also can be hard, or right there in here. So it's hard. So it can be very fluid, very liquidy. It can be viscous, or it can be slightly viscous, or it can be very viscous, gelatinous. So it's a gel, or it can be hard, like you find in bone. And the ground substance secures the connective tissue cells within the extracellular matrix, and it's the medium through which fluid flows through and around the cells and the fibers, and macrophages and white blood cells also move through this ground substance. It gives the tissue its specific properties, or it gives the tissue specific properties that tie into its function. So the cells produce both fibers and the ground substance. The ground substance is a liquidy type of, substance through which other things can move, whether it's water or white blood cells can move through that. And then you have fibers that also produce the extracellular matrix, and they provide the the function for that, for the ECM. All right, next slide. So what I'm going to do is on the slides, when we go to a different connective tissue, I'm going to bold it and underline it. So we're going to talk first about loose connective tissue. So what is loose connective tissue? Well, the fibers in the extracellular matrix, remember you have cells, fibers, and ground substance. So the fibers are loosely arranged. You have lots of room between the cells, and you have collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers. And those provide strength, elasticity, and support. The ground substance is semi-fluid, so it's viscous, but stuff can diffuse, or other fluid, it's called interstitial fluid, would mean fluid between cells, can diffuse through this. The two types of cells that are in this tissue are fibroblasts and adipocytes. Fibroblasts, fibro referring to fiber, blast meaning cell, so these are cells that produce fibers, so fibroblasts, and adipocytes meaning fat cells, so those are cells that store fat, and they permanently reside in this tissue. Cells that are involved in body defense, such as white blood cells, macrophages, mast cells, macrophages and mast cells, enter this connective tissue. They leave blood vessels, they travel down blood vessels, they leave the blood vessels, and they go through this extracellular matrix, and they move around, and they can monitor and patrol for things that somehow got through the epithelial layer into the connective tissue layers. So what are the three types of loose connective tissue? Well, there's areolar, there is reticular, and there's adipose. So areolar is the most abundant one. Areolar tissue underlies every single epithelial cell layer. So whenever you have a layer of epithelial cells, whenever you have epithelial tissue, right underneath that you're going to have areolar tissue. Sorry about that. It has fibroblasts and all three fiber types. So it has elastic fibers and collagen fibers, as well as, it has the semi-fluid ground substance. It also can contain adipose cells, and so and the white blood cells and various other cells involved in defense of the body. The areolar tissue holds the organs in place and attaches the epithelial tissue to other underlying tissues. It serves as a reservoir for water and salts for surrounding tissues. So stuff can diffuse out of the blood vessels into areolar tissue and sit there, and then when the epithelial cells above it need it, it just diffuses across into those epithelial layers, and then waste from those can diffuse into the areolar layer. So it produces it's a nice, like, think of it as a reservoir for the town for water. So you take the water when you need it, and then they put more water in from like, say, the river or the streams when they need to fill it back up again. So it holds, and almost all cells obtain their nutrients from this and release their wastes into areolar connective tissue. Reticular connective tissue contains reticular cells. They're a type of fibroblast, so they produce a fiber, a reticular fiber, that synthesizes the ground substance, and this type of tissue has more reticular fibers than collagen. So areolar tissue has all three fiber types, not in equal amounts, but in sort of equal amounts. So you have reticular fibers and collagen fibers and elastic fibers, all in those. Reticular tissue just has a lot more reticular fibers than it does collagen. Reticular fibers are the dominant fiber in reticular tissue. Adipose tissue is like areolar tissue. It contains fibroblasts, fibers, ground substance, and adipose cells, but it contains a lot more adipose cells, adipocytes, than areolar connective tissue, and very little extracellular matrix. The lipid in the cells doesn't stain. So when you look at adipose tissue on a slide, it's going to look like there's like little tiny circles there that are all empty. And the reason is, when you fix adipose tissue on a slide, you a lot of times use an alcohol wash, and alcohol removes the fat from that tissue, or from the tissue that's fixed on when you fix on the slide. So it looks like these cells are all empty. Okay, next slide. So here's what loose connective tissue looks like. So here's cell, here's a fiber, and then the white space in between, that's all ground substance. I guess I should write it out, ground substance. So here's a cell here. There's the nucleus here. Okay. Here's another cell here, and they produce fibers. This cell is producing lots of fibers. It's kind of wrapped around these fibers as it's producing them. Here's another type of cell down here, and the ground substance you can see is in between this. So this is a simple slide. I want to show you this slide before we get into the other slides, which get a little more complicated. So you have these kind of fibers that are down here, like that one, and that's a branching kind of fiber. So that looks like more like a reticular type fiber. Okay. These fibers that are bundled together here, those are more collagen. That looks like what collagen fibers would look like. They make like these bundles. There's fibers, there's a whole bunch of fibers all next to each other, and they make a bundle. Reticular fibers go out and they branch all over the place. Those they could, these fibers I'm saying they're branching. They also could be elastic fibers. Those all tend to branch as well. So, okay, next slide. So here's what loose connective tissue looks like. Areolar specifically, loose connective tissue. And so you see the fibers. So there's various types of fibers in here. So that's a cell here. Here's a cell. Here's a cell. Here's a cell. Notice there's lots of space between these cells. Okay, it's not like the epithelial cells where all the cells are all jam-packed together. Remember that columnar epithelium where they're like lined up little soldiers in a row. So you got one like that. These guys are all spaced out because they're making lots of stuff between them. And you notice there's not only that type of cell, there's also these larger cells. This is could be a white blood cell. There's another one over here, and there's another one here, and then there's this type of cell here, and there's a cell here. So then you got these fibers here, and you have various types of fibers. There's all different types. They all look different. And then there's these kind of bundles of fibers. So these are probably those right there. And these right here are probably collagen fibers. Now I'm kind of making a guess because I'm not sure where this is from, but it's kind of bundles of fibers, so maybe that's those collagen. And these could be, since those seem to be going along and branching a little bit, those might be reticular fibers. Or they could be elastic, or I'm going to put elastic fibers. Okay. So, and then here's 1000x magnification up here, showing fibers and then a cell, number 1 and number 2. Okay, next slide. So here's a diagram showing the various types of cells and fibers that you might find in this portion of areolar connective tissue. So you have fibroblasts, you have elastic fibers. They're usually long, thin, and dark. Reticular fibers are generally shorter, they're thinner, and they branch. So we have a mast cell is down. So this is a mast cell up here. This is a mast, so that'd be a white blood cell there. Here's another one here. And then you have the fibroblast is this guy in green here. That's a fibroblast there, and he's wrapped around. And then there's the blue fibers are collagen fibers, and they've used looks like kind of a pinkish color to denote the elastic fibers, and then the reticular fibers are more the orangey yellow ones. All right, next slide. Here's the picture from your guys' book, Loose Connective Tissue. They refer to it as loose connective tissue. I refer to this as areolar connective tissue because the book only has one type of connective tissue, one type of loose connective tissue, and so they use the words areolar connective tissue and loose connective tissue interchangeably. I put 3 types of connective tissue into loose connective tissue. There's areolar and reticular and adipose in loose connective tissue. So that's where I'm kind of differing from the book here. So, but this is areolar connective tissue, and so we have a fibroblast. You can see that there. Then the space between all that, the stuff between is all the ground substance. Here's an elastic fiber, and here's some collagen fibers, a bundle of collagen fibers there. And so I'm going to show you another picture of areolar connective tissue. Next slide. Well, maybe not. Going on to adipose tissue is another type of loose connective tissue. I think I took that slide out, sorry. So here is number one is pointing to a nucleus, okay? And number two is pointing to the inside of a cell. This whole thing right here is a cell. And here's another one here, okay? And here's another one. All right, so these are all each cells, okay? So this right here is a picture of one cell. And so that big old space in there, that's all filled with fat. So this is, you can find this type of tissue underneath your skin, and various other places around the body, but in the what's called the hypodermis, and we'll talk about that in the integumentary system in the last lecture, the last class. So this, and see, it looks nice, bright white. It's because when you fix the cells, this tissue to the slide, it washes away the fat. So, but each of those is a single cell, has a single nucleus. And there, so there's your nucleus right there for the fat cell. So that's your nucleus. And this would be all fat inside this adipocyte. So that's the second type of loose connective tissue, adipose tissue. Next slide. Oh, here's a diagram of it, just to show you this. So there's blood vessels running through this. So here's your blood vessel. You have a nucleus, and you have a single cell. So this is a single cell, single adipose cell there. And that's the fat storage area. And then the thinner part around the outside is the cytoplasm, and then the plasma membrane you can see. Next slide. Here's a picture out of your guys' book, Adipose tissue from below the skin, hypodermis. And so you can see here is a fat cell here. Let's see, here's another one here. I'm just drawing random ones. All these that you see are all fat cells here. So every single one, there's another one there. So and this is pointing out the nuclei. You have adipose with lipid in them, or lipid is fat. And then collagen fibers are all here, all around the outside. So this is adipose tissue. Next slide. So this is also loose connective tissue. This is reticular tissue. This is from a lymph node. So these are, let's see, so you can see the reticular fibers all in here. So there's a reticular fiber there. There's some there. And these fibers down here. Okay. And then you see each of these red things with blue. Those are all cells. So those are producing the reticular fibers. And then you have, in the lymph node, you also have other types of cells in there as well. So there's your reticular fibers. So this is reticular connective tissue. As part in the category of loose connective tissue. Next slide. So these are all, this is a diagram showing the nucleus of the reticular cell. And there's the reticular fibers. And you can see all those fibers that are all in there. I'm not sure why it's showing this little light ones in the background. These are all, there's some, the ones in, that's reticular fiber as well as that right there, the big blue. So they got some in the foreground and some in the background is what you're looking at this slide. Okay, next slide. Here's a slide from your guys' book, reticular tissue from lymph node. And they went, stained it with a green stain. So yeah, so it looks really different from the other slide, but it's the same stuff. So here's reticular fibers showing those. And then you have some leukocytes in here, some white blood cells in there, as well as reticulocytes. So you have these reticular cells in here, like there, and like there, and all these little dots in here. Those are all cells that are producing the reticular fibers. Next slide. Okay, so where do you find loose connective tissues? Well, areolar is beneath all epithelial tissues, because you got to have some way of getting nutrients to those epithelial tissues, because epithelial tissues are avascular. They have no blood vessels in them. So the areolar connective tissue has blood vessels in it. And so that provides nutrients for the epithelial cells. And the adipose tissue is found under the skin and surrounds lots of organs. So you have lots of fat storage in lots of places. You have adipose tissue is often called subcutaneous fat. It's in the hypodermal or hypodermis, and sometimes it's referred to like if you're looking at health kind of things, they'll refer to it as cutaneous fat. Technically, it's subcutaneous fat because it's cutaneous meaning skin, so it's beneath the skin. So it's almost always where adipose tissue is. Then you have reticular connective tissue. It's the third type of loose connective tissue, and you find that in the liver, the spleen, and the lymph nodes. And if you remember from the rat dissection, the liver, while firm, was very flexible. The spleen was also very flexible if you poked at those. So those the liver and spleen and lymph nodes are all made up of a bunch of cells, and they need some sort of framework to like hold them in place. And so that's what the reticular fibers do. They allow lots of space between all these cells, but they provide a framework to hold all those cells in place for those organs, for the soft organs. All right, next slide. And let's see. Okay, now we're going on to dense connective tissue. So we've left the loose connective tissue. Now we're doing dense connective tissue. So what is dense connective tissue? Well, dense connective tissue, the extracellular matrix, is jam-packed with fibers. Okay, there's not a lot of room. There's a lot of room between cells, but it's filled with fibers. There's not that much ground substance. So in contrast to areolar or other types, all the loose connective tissue, there's lots of ground substance, lots of fibers, and just a few cells. In dense connective tissue, there's lots and lots of fibers, not much ground substance, and few cells. Okay. So what types of dense connective tissue are there? Well, there's dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Okay. So we're going to look at pictures of all these, and it'll be really obvious as to what is meant by all this. Dense regular, the extracellular matrix, is packed with these parallel bundles of fibers. They all go in the direction of the pulling forces applied to the tissue. There are fibroblasts between these bundles, and cytoplasm extends between and around the bundles of collagen. Collagen is protein, and so you have these long fibers. And so there's all these groups of fibers. Let's see if I can pull some pencils out over here. And so we all have all these, so you have a bundle of fibers, okay, collagen fibers. It's probably not a good model because those are all different colors, but hey, you get the idea. It's a bundle of fibers. And let's see, where was I? Oh, it's also called white fibrous tissue. It has this kind of silvery white appearance. And so dense regular tissue, so think about this. Structure and function are often very closely related. So you have parallel bundles of collagen fibers. They're all going in the same direction. So what can you do with that? Well, you can pull one thing over here against another one. So you can pull, and it's kind of like a tug of war, right? So you're going to have a lot of strength along this bundle of fibers. Okay. So where would you want that? Well, in tendons would be a good example. So think about your Achilles tendon. You can reach down and feel that next to your ankle, and you feel that Achilles tendon. And so it's pulling against the heel bone. I'll use my hand to demonstrate it. Against the heel bone, pull against the calf muscle here, and so you have this Achilles tendon there. It's pulling against that, and so you have a lot of strength along that one direction. So you can so when your calf muscle contracts, it yanks that tendon up and pulls the heel up, and then you can lurch forward and walk. All right, so dense irregular tissue, connective tissue, what does that do? Well, it's got the same type of stuff, has collagen in it, lots and lots of collagen, very little ground substance, and few cells, few fibroblasts, except that in this case, the collagen fibers are not arranged in parallel bundles. They're all different directions. They're irregularly arranged, okay? So, and this would be used in places or found in places where you have stuff that has different directional forces applied to it. So like the skin. So like you can take your skin and you can move it all kinds of different directions, all right, and it doesn't tear. One reason is the epithelial tissues, but you can move that around, and it goes back to saying there's no damage. It doesn't look any different than it did before. So what you have are all these fibers that cross over and they go all kinds of different directions, okay, And so it resists pulling forces from multiple directions. Elastic connective tissue, the last one here, also called dense elastic connective tissue. The extracellular matrix is packed with elastic fibers, and the fibroblasts are found in the space between the fibers. And these elastic fibers allow the tissue to be stretched and then stretched out and then regain its original size and shape. So one of the places, where would you want to have that? Well, one of those places you'll find that is in the aorta, so which is the major blood vessel coming out of the heart. And so when the ventricle of the heart contracts, sorry, I lost train of thought. The ventricle heart contracts, and this is big force pushing blood, and it squirts out out the aorta. Well, the aorta is got to take that pressure, and if the aorta is one size, it's going to slam against the side of that, and it's going to it may wear down. So this has a little bit of give to it, has a little bit of elasticity to it, so it can expand a little bit, and then it can contract back down the same size, because you don't want it to like open and then open more and open more and open more, because eventually you'll lose blood pressure. So you want the aorta to expand and contract and expand and it contracts. So you want it to be able to retain it, go back to its original shape. So that's where you would find elastic connective tissue, or dense elastic connective tissue. So the dense connective tissues, you have dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic or dense elastic. Next slide. Okay, and it helps to call the elastic connective tissue dense elastic connective tissue, because that kind of helps you distinguish it from elastic cartilage, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to cartilage. So, but right now we're talking about dense regular connective tissue. So this tissue in this particular slide is showing a tendon. So they slice through it, and you see that all the bundles of collagen fibers are all running parallel to each other. Okay, so you have all these fibers, and they're all bundled, and they'll run the same direction. So you have lots of strength pulling back and forth along this fiber. So you can have like a calf muscle and your heel, and it can pull back and forth, and you'll have lots of strength that way. May not have as much strength across it, but you have a lot of strength going back longitudinally along the line of these fibers. And this is showing right here is a bundle of collagen fibers, and here this is showing a fibroblast here, and that black part's the nucleus. So this would be another fibroblast here. Here'd be another one down here. And it's probably a weird cross section, because there's another one here. It's probably something like that. There's probably a cell wall there somewhere. So you just can't see. So anyway, so you see a few cells in between all of these bundles of collagen fibers. So these cells are sitting on top of these collagen fibers, they made them, and then they sort of just adhere to them. And so so you have cells inside your tendons that can repair the tendons if you tear them. There's not a great blood supply to a lot of these tendons, so that's why they're slow to repair, but these cells are there. Okay, next slide. So here's a diagram of it. So here's your fibroblast with the nucleus in it. Okay, so here's a fibroblast. And you notice these guys have a little space around them. Okay, and when we talk about other types of tissue, we'll talk about that a little bit. So there's sort of, they're similar in a way to the some other tissues. They have like a little bit of space around them. So but there's not much ground substance. That's what the space is. It's all ground substance, that's all ground substance there. So, and here's your collagen fibers. So all of these bundles all through here. I guess I should, here's a bundle, and here's a bundle, and here's a bundle. So they all run kind of parallel. This makes a little bit of wave to it, because the stuff's not going to be necessarily exactly straight. You want a little bit of give to it so it can be pulled, but if you pull it, it's not going to like break. So it has a little bit of give to it. Next slide. This is another picture. This is a picture out of your guys' book with dense regular connective tissue. For some reason, they put the word collagenous in the middle of that. So dense regular connective tissue has collagen in it. Okay, so this is a tendon here connecting muscle to bone. So you have fibroblasts. You can see those. This is pointing out the ground substance. This little white areas there. There's a fibroblast with the showing the nucleus there. Here's here's another one. Here's other ones here. Here's another one here. Okay, so you can see these little fibroblasts in there. And then you have the parallel collagen fibers. So all these fibers coming across here. These are all parallel collagen fibers going all across there. I'm not drawing the whole length of them. They're long. Okay, I'm just making little marks on here. All right. So, all right, next slide. Now, in contrast to dense regular connective tissue, when you slice through it longitudinally, you see the long fibers. In dense irregular connective tissue, when you cut through it, well, the fibers are rearranged in all kinds of different configurations. So if you slice through that, you're going to see, sometimes you'll see ovals, sometimes you'll slice along the length of one, sometimes you'll slice diagonally through one, sometimes you'll slice through, and you'll see, if you look at the end of that, then you'd see a round spot, or if you did obliquely through it, you would see a kind of an oval, or if you went longitudinally, you'd see a long length, and that's what you see. So here you go. Here is a longitudinal cut through one. Here's more of a round one here. Here's more of an oval here. Okay, so these fibers are all kind of jumbly. They're all going different directions. So that's what dense irregular connective tissue. The collagen is arranged irregularly in the tissue. Okay, next slide. Here's a diagram out of your book. Longitudinal section there, transverse section through here, 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 here. These are all more or less transverse sections through all that, through various fibers, various bundles of collagen fibers. And there's a blood vessel here. Red blood cell there, another red blood cell here. So, and it's a fibroblast. So the kind of shiny middle part there is the nucleus there. So there's a nucleus. So here's a fibroblast here with its nucleus. So all right, next slide. So this is a picture out of your guys' book. Dense irregular connective tissue from the dermis, the skin. There's a kind of unfortunate use of the word reticular with a part of the skin, so it's a little confusing. But it's the portion of the skin that's just below the surface. So anyway, this is dense irregular connective tissue below the skin, so you can see how it's kind of swirly and kind of the fibers are all arranged in different directions. So that means that you can move your skin around, so no matter where. So it goes back to the original shape. And you can pull on it from all different kinds of directions. So if I brush my arm, I brush my hand against, say, a door jamb when I was walking into the room, it pulls the skin back and then pops back in place. So, but I could have hit it that direction as well, or this direction, So anyway, you get the idea. Next slide. Okay, dense elastic connective tissue. This is a section through the wall of the aorta, looking at the fibers. So, and you can see how these fibers are in kind of wavy, all right? Kind of like a spring, right? So these fibers wave, and so then you can stretch them, and then they'll snap back, just like a spring would. So if you guys ever played with a slinky, it's kind of the same kind of idea, or springs of any type. So here's your elastic connective tissue type fibers, and through here, like that. I guess I should change to a different color so you guys can see what I'm drawing, huh? I'll draw it in white. So here we go. Here's some fiber. Here's dense elastic fibers, like that. There you go. So you can see how they're wavy through this in the wall of the aorta. So it allows it to expand and then pop back to the original shape after the main squirt of blood has gone through. Next slide. So here are your elastic fibers. You have a fibroblast here. There's another one here. So you can see it's fibroblasts. Then you have the elastic fibers. I'll go back to white. So here's elastic fiber. So you can see it's kind of wavy as it's going along. So it allows and gives this spring-like action to the tissue. Okay. Next slide. And here's a picture out of your guys' book. Oops. There it is. Sorry. So here's a picture of your guys' book, dense. So this is dense elastic connective tissue, or dense regular elastic connective tissue is often what it's called as well. And so you can see the wavy lines there of the elastic fibers. So then they're parallel also. They're not like all different kind of directions. They're parallel to each other, so you have a lot of elastic strength in a certain direction. Then the white space between there is all ground substance. Okay, you don't see a whole lot of cells in there. If you'll notice that they didn't point out any cells in this picture at all. In fact, so there are cells in there that produce those elastic fibers, but they're not as easy to see. All right, next slide. So where do you find dense regular connective tissue? Well, it forms ligaments and tendons. So it connects bone to bone, or tendons which connect muscle to bone. Also, there's things called aponeuroses, which are tendons that connect muscle to muscle, or bone to bone, or muscle to bone, sorry. So it resists pulling forces between and at attachment sites. Then you have dense irregular. One of the most common places you think of that one is in the skin, resists pulling forces from many directions. Then you have elastic, or also referred to as dense elastic connective tissue, and that's found in lungs, trachea, bronchi, aorta, and other elastic arteries. So it's not found in all the arteries, but it's found in a lot of places where you need a lot of elasticity, where you need it to stretch and then come back to the place. And let's see, allows recoil of those tubes. They can expand and they can track back down. Okay, and the lungs, trachea, and bronchi need elastic because you fill your lungs up and then you exhale, so those go out and they come back down. So you need to be able to retain the shape. You don't want those collagen fibers to get stretched. Then they're stretched. Then when you exhale, it would kind of sag back. Then you breathe again, and they stretch, and they'd sag back more because now they're stretched out. So you don't want that to happen. So what you want that to have is have it be elastic. So you stretch it and it comes back to the same shape it was. You don't want it to stretch out like happens as you get older. Your collagen loses flexibility, so you lose collagen. So your skin gets much less stretchy than it is when you're a lot younger. So next slide.